When I was a kid in school and I heard we were going to have a field trip, I sometimes wondered to myself, why don't we ever actually end up in a field? Why do they call it a field trip if we aren't going to a field? You know, a field like a place with grass and the blue sky overhead, birds, maybe the occasional deer, a possum, bobolink, porcupine, farmer in the distance, that sort of thing. Well, I learned later on that there are really two senses to the word field. One sense of the word field is grass, sky, something, place you could plow if you wanted to. But the other is to think about a place outside of the place where you usually think about things in the abstract. It's the place where things happen, where the things that you study actually take place. And so in that sense, a field trip is a place to go where things actually happen that you may have been studying in school. Similarly, as social scientists, we occasionally carry out field experiments. And a field experiment is an experiment that doesn't happen in our place, where we think about things and we invite someone else in. A field experiment happens when we go to the place where things happen and we carry out the experiment there, in the situation where the outcome we're interested in happens every day. And so in the sociology of discrimination, we can think about field experiments. And we're not talking about this kind of field. We're talking about the kind of field where discrimination may or may not happen every day. These field experiments are tests to see whether the kinds of discrimination we imagine back at school actually happens. How do we figure that out? Well, the idea of a field experiment is to go into a situation as it is, not as you imagine it, and to set things up with, at its simplest, a pair of people. Two people alike in almost every possible respect. They may dress alike, they may look alike, they may act alike, they may be told to do the same things, they may be assigned fictional attributes. These fictional attributes involve, education, income, what have I forgotten? Well, there's also neighborhood. The very fact of neighborhood can influence the way that people are thought of, the way people are treated. And so you have to set all those to be exactly the same. Exactly the same except for one thing. And that one thing is either leading to no difference in how people are treated, or a whole lot of difference in how people are treated. And if we see a difference in treatment between two people, and they're otherwise the same, then what do we have? We have discrimination, which is treating people differently on the basis of some one thing. So, field experiments that have an alternative name, audit studies, have this approach where everything is held constant, two people are the same in every possible fashion except for one way in which they're different. And you look at that one way in which they're different, and if they're treated differently, well, what's the source of that difference in treatment? It's their difference in status. So, what differences arise as a consequence of that difference in status? Let's start to take a look. Ian Ayers and Peter Siegelman in the American Economic Review have a classic audit study, one that looks at two kinds of differences simultaneously. Now, these testers, these people who go out into the field, into the field of auto dealerships to try to buy a car. They're the same in terms of their clothing. They're the same in terms of their age range. They present themselves as having the same education, same occupations, same neighborhoods, same financing ability, same credit scores, the same bargaining strategy. So when they get an offer, they come back with the same counter offer. What's different? Only one thing, and that is race and gender. So there are two outcomes that Ayers and Siegelman looked at. The first was the initial profit that would go to the dealer based on the initial offer made by the dealer to the person who comes in. And the second is the final profit to the dealer. After all this haggling, after all this negotiation, how much does the dealer finally make when they say, this is my final offer? And remember, the bargaining strategy is the same for all these testers. The only difference is race and gender. So let's take a look at this result in this chart. And when we think about that chart, we're going to notice that, wow, who gets the best deal? Well, the buyer that gets the best deal is the one who has the lowest profit going to the dealer. So for the initial profit, in the initial offer, who gets the best initial offer? The white male. Who gets the worst initial offer? Black male. So within maleness, there's a clear disadvantage by race. If you just walk in and you have the identity of a black man, no matter how well you are able to pay, what your age is, what clothes you're wearing, what your education is, what neighborhood you're coming from, which is a common clue to people, you're going to get an offer that's almost $1,000 worse. So that's racial discrimination. It's very clear. Within females, also, black females do worse than white females. So you can also see that there is racial discrimination there. Although intersectionality, we can begin to see that the extent of racial discrimination is much larger for males than it is for females. So this is one way that race and gender discrimination intersect. Well, let's take a look at gender discrimination now. Within race, we have a really interesting pattern. For whites, the white male gets a slightly better deal than a white female. I say slightly, you know, it's about $100. That's a big deal. $100. I would like a $100 bill, please. And that's a subtle kind of discrimination, but it happens again and again and again and again. So within the race of whiteness, there is a disadvantage to being a woman. Within the race of blackness, which is this social category that we've constructed in the United States, who gets a better deal? Women do. Black women get better deals than black men by a large amount. Not as huge an amount as between white males and black males, but still a considerable difference. That looks like about $600 if I'm looking at that chart correctly. That's huge. And these differences occur in the initial offer that people get, and then if you look at final profit, the pattern is preserved in the final profit to the dealer. So people are going to walk away from these car dealers being treated differently according to combinations of race and gender. Racial discrimination exists. Gender discrimination exists. You can see it right here. And what the meaning of gender discrimination is depends on race. You cannot simply say, if you want to be accurate, that men are treated better than women. That is true for white people. It is the opposite case for black people in America. So what does that mean, really, right? So it means that there are really 4 race-gender combinations in the United States when it comes to how people are treated by car dealers. That sounds strange, perhaps, but it only sounds strange if we think of race and gender as these real things that exist outside of humanity. They don't exist outside of human expectations, human social definitions. We decide what these categories are. We decide what they mean. And apparently we have decided that the folks who are going to get the worst offer are black men, and that within blackness there's a disadvantage to being male. or being perceived as having the gender category of masculinity. And within whiteness, it is an advantage to have that masculinity. So let's move from cars to cellos. So an interesting thing happens when you're auditioning for the orchestra. Actually, I've never auditioned for the orchestra. I don't know if you have, but there are people who do. It's a nice, cushy job. Actually, it involves a whole lot of work, but it's a huge amount of prestige, and people work their whole lives for these jobs. And it comes down to an audition. So the question is, when you do this audition, are you doing it on stage, and are people looking at you? When they're looking at you, what are they seeing? Are they seeing your music? Or are they seeing your skin? Are they seeing your clothes and your gender? So these visual cues of gender matter. As orchestras start to pay attention to this and notice, there's a lot of women applying, but there's a lot of men still in the orchestra. What could it be? In the 1970s and the 1980s, they began to use screens so that a person comes on stage and is never seen by the reviewers, the people who are listening to the music. They don't know who's behind the screen. They only can hear the music. When that happens, when the screens are introduced, it turns out that the probability of a woman getting selected for a position goes up by 50%. What does that indicate? It indicates that the music wasn't being auditioned, it was gender that was being auditioned. And the screen takes that away, women end up doing better. What about, this is an article that you read, what about in academia? Okay, so this is a third arena. In academia, research work by professors and graduate students who hope to become professors someday, the symposium, the research conference is hugely important. If you can get a chance to present your research at a research conference, you are going to impress your peers, you're going to get job offers, you're going to get an offer for publication somewhere in some outlet, which is the key, is the ticket to remaining at a university for the long term and having a successful career. So what happens when you have gatekeepers? You do have gatekeepers at conferences. These are called conveners, and they often, especially in the biological sciences, they get a lot of say over who's going to be on their panels presenting at the conference. So what happens when you have all male conveners? This is from your reading if you're taking my class. If you have all male conveners, the black bars, from 2011 to 2013 at 2 separate conferences, you get fewer women speakers, a much lower percentage, by 10 to 20 percentage points at one conference and 5 to 10 at the other. When you have at least one female convener, one woman in science who is on this panel of people who's picking other people to present their work, the percent of women speakers goes up, the gray bars, by a huge amount. So what about all male sessions? Have you ever gone to a conference or a setting in which you've only seen men speaking? How does it get to be that way? Well, the researchers, Arturo Casadevall and Joe Handelsman, figure out that when they're all male conveners, you have much more likely a situation in which you have all men who are speaking there. When you have at least one female convener, the percentage of all male sessions goes down markedly, more so at one convention than at the other, but goes down significantly. The gray bars are shorter than the black bars. So the presence of women in leadership positions, able to serve as gatekeepers to welcome some people in or not, does seem to have a difference, does seem to have an impact on whether women in science are able to move forward. There's another step that's really important in a natural science environment, and that is if you want to move on to grad school, if you're an undergraduate student in science, you want to get some work in a lab. So, and it pays relatively well. It's a nice job when you first are getting started in science, but you have to apply, right? And those applications can be accepted or not. Well, so a series of applications were sent out. Now these were actually fake applications that were set to be the same in quality, showing the same qualifications, right? The only thing that was different was a name randomly assigned that was clearly what we think of as culturally a male name, culturally a female name. And that's the only thing that differs. And it's sent out to bio, chem, and physics faculty in the United States. And the application is for a job as a lab manager in the natural sciences. So it turns out that when the applications that are equivalent in quality, right? This is essentially a field experiment, an audit study. When the name has a male name, they are judged to be more competent, they're judged to be more worthy of hiring, and they are judged to be more worthy of mentoring. This is someone that we would want to really pull forward. Female names in applications get less of a ranking of competence. They're judged to be less hireable and to be less worthy of mentoring. They also get a lower initial offer in terms of what they would get paid. By how much? About a little over $4,000. That's huge, okay? Especially when you're getting started in work. The salary that is offered to the applicant is lower if the name at the top of the application is a culturally female name. So, does faculty gender affect those results? We saw earlier when it came to conferences that having women there as gatekeepers, able to let women in or not let women in, seemed to have an effect. But here, when it comes to hiring people as lab managers, the answer is a big fat no. That women faculty in the natural sciences are just as discriminatory toward women undergraduate applicants for that science lab manager job as men in academia. So there's something that is shared, this cultural idea that is shared, that is acted upon regarding women in science, and it's acted upon, at least for lab manager jobs, equally by men and women in faculty. So we talked earlier about this idea that when it comes to buying a car, there are really 4 race gender combinations. We could think also that perhaps when it comes to getting a job, that there are really 4 different kinds of genders out there in the work world. So in the work world, you have men and women, certainly, but what kind of men and women are we talking about? Are they fathers? Are they mothers? Or are they men and women without children? So Shelley Cornell, Stephen Bernard, and Ann Pike ask this question in research published in the American Journal of Sociology. They ask first to undergraduate students of theirs, will you evaluate all these different applications? And in these applications, we want you to judge competence, commitment, the recommended salary, recommendation, would this person be good in management? Would you hire them? Do you think we would promote them in the future? And so these undergraduate volunteers, 84 men, 104 women doing the rating, are looking at these paper applications. And the paper applications are manipulated so that they have male names and female names very clearly. We're not talking about Chris and Pat here. We're talking about Mark. We're talking about Linda. Very clear gendered names. And one other piece of information is either included or not included in the applications. The applicants say something about having children, or they don't say something about having children. So you have 4 categories. You have men who don't indicate their fathers, men who do indicate that they're fathers, women who don't indicate that they're mothers, and women who do indicate that they're mothers. What's the result? Mothers are judged to be less competent, less committed, worthy of a lower salary, less often recommended for management, less likely to be promoted in the future, and less often recommended to be hired than women who are not mothers. On the other hand, right, parenthood has the opposite effect for men. If you are a father, right, this is a different category. Fatherhood is different than motherhood. They're judged to be more competent, more committed, to be granted a higher salary, more often recommended for management. Boy, they win everything. More likely to be hired. And the undergraduate students indicate they're more likely to be promoted in the future. The meaning of parenthood is something that intersects with gender, so that parenthood is not just this expectation that we have for everybody. We think fathers and mothers are different. Now, you might be objecting at this point by saying these are just undergraduates. Undergraduates don't actually hire people. Maybe undergraduates are just really discriminatory people. Fine. So let's do an audit study. Let's do a field experiment. Shelley Cornell and colleagues do just this. They send out resumes and cover letters from pairs of fictitious, meaning made up, but equally qualified individuals. That's important. They're equally qualified in every way, and the only thing they have different in terms of their qualification is their gender qualification and their parenthood qualification. Do they indicate that they're parents, and what is their gender? Here are the results. This is the callback rate. Okay, you get that call. Now, so the first thing to notice is that you should not ever get really upset if you don't get calls back from one place that you applied to for a job. You should apply to about 20 of them because the callback rate is somewhere around 5%. Keep at it, you'll get that job. But the effect of being a parent is really apparent. If you are a male and you are a parent, and you are going to get a callback rate of 5%. If you're a woman and you indicate you're a parent on your application, you'll only get a callback rate of 3%. 5%, 3%, those two numbers don't sound that different, but 5% is almost double what 3% is. So that's a big deal. Look at what happens, though, when you're not a parent. There's also a kind of discrimination that happens here. What do we think of when we think of men who are not parents? We think of these young men, haven't gotten married and had kids yet. What are they like? Think about that image in your head. What do you think of a young woman, not yet married, doesn't have kids yet? What is your image in your mind of her? Well, apparently, actual employers really like women who are not married and don't have kids. They actually get the highest callback rate in the study. The problem is, if we think about this kind of intersection of parenthood status and gender, that where do most people spend their adult working lives? They spend their lives in the parent category, not the non-parent category. So that means that the bulk of discrimination over a life course is occurring on the parenthood side of the equation, where men do better if they're parents than women do. That's discrimination. And it's a gender discrimination that's complicated, but nonetheless very important. Okay, so gender is not just simply, do we think you're male or female, and what expectations do we have associated with that? Gender also extends to sexual orientation, and the things that we attach to sexual orientation, which literally we don't see much of. We don't see people in their bedrooms, but we attach this cultural meaning to it, right? Where culture is a set of values and beliefs about who the sort of person is that has a particular sexual orientation, gay or straight. So here we go back to buying cars. What happens if two men go into a dealership and they indicate to the dealer, hey, we're buds, we're friends, and this guy sees my friend, he's just coming along. Well, I want to buy a car. Versus, hey, how you doing? This is my partner here, right? Indicating a same-sex relationship, sexual orientation. Well, I'm looking for a car, and my partner is with me. Are they going to get treated differently when those are the only things that differ? They have the same credit history, they're coming from the same neighborhood, they say the same things otherwise. Yeah, they get treated differently. 60% of the pairs of men where they indicate they're just friends with one another
are offered a test drive. Only 45.7% of the partners get offered that test drive. When an initial offer is put in, is the initial offer by the person who wants to buy the car accepted? Well, in 8.6% of the case for male friend partners, yes. But when you're talking about partners, 0%. That's a big fat goose egg. None of them were accepted. And eventually, even if the initial offer isn't accepted, maybe an eventual offer is accepted. That happens in 20% of cases for two men together who indicate we're just friends. But it drops down to 11.4% acceptance rate for partners. And this is when, again, they're doing exactly the same things. They only indicate that this seemingly unrelated status is different. So here's an interesting audit study. It's a field experiment in which individuals go out. They differ by race, they differ by gender, and they differ by age. Some of them are young, some of them are middle-aged, and they drop a pen. And someone is standing in the background and is trying to see, does that dropped pen lead to someone getting help? Does someone pick up the pen and give it back to them? What about if you drop a wallet? What if you're looking for directions? What if you're dropping your keys? So I'm going to show you results for pens, keys, and if you're asking for help with directions. And here we're looking at young white men, young white females, young black men, and young black females, going from left to right. So who's most likely to get the help? If we're looking across racial groups, women, young females are most likely to get the help. When they ask for directions, they're most likely to get directions. When they drop their keys, someone's more likely to pick it up. When they drop a pen, someone's more likely to pick it up. Men are less likely to get that. Which men are least likely to get the help? Black men. Young black men. And that's the green bar here. And you can see it's a big difference, especially for something as inconsequential as a pen or for helping with directions. There's the biggest differences there. Black women are comparable in how they're treated in terms of looking for directions, looking for keys, looking for a pen. They get more help. There's this race gender combination of black male, and particularly young black male, that seems to be discriminated against here. And that's a race-gender combination. In this case, in this instance, when we're thinking about help, perhaps it's because we are a patronizing set of people in the United States, and we think women need help more than men need help. You know, we'd have to actually look inside people's heads to find out why. We don't know why. We don't know what kinds of prejudice might be lying behind that, but we do know what the behavior is, and behavior is measuring discrimination. And the behavior that we see is one of young black men getting less help in 3 different kinds of situations. What's really interesting here when we look at middle age is that things equalize out. Okay, in terms of dropping a pen, middle-aged black men get pens a little bit less often. But otherwise, and they get keys a little bit less often, but really roughly the same. It's a very different story than when we're talking about young black men. And middle-aged white men are also a more favored status. There's something about middle age and gender, and middle age particularly, and gender for black men that equalizes out. Think about that. That's a very contingent kind of discrimination. Contingent meaning it depends. So we can't simply say men have it easy, women have it hard, or black people have it easy, white people have it hard, or vice versa. We need to think about combinations of age and gender and race, and that's what it means to say that these kind of categories intersect. And we have very particular ideas in our head, the young black male, in terms of getting help. So in another of this series of, hey, it depends kinds of studies, David Newmark and colleagues look at sex discrimination in restaurant hiring, and they find they match men and women in this audit study, this field experiment, with comparable skills, comparable experience. They're going into a restaurant and saying, hey, I'd like a job waiting on tables as a waiter or a waitress. And who gets job offers more? Well, it depends on what kind of restaurant you're talking about. At high-price restaurants, applications from women led to job offers 40% less often than applications from men. Men do better in higher-price restaurants. In medium-price restaurants, applications from women get job offers 21% less often than applications from men. Men benefit. Low-price restaurants, actually, women benefit. Women who apply get job offers 28% more often than men. So that's a flip. It's a switch. What do we know about these places? Which ones would you like to work at? High-price restaurant or low-price restaurant if you were waiting tables? McDonald's, you don't get tips. High-price restaurants, you get tips. They're expected, and they're tips for high-price, $40 steaks, and you get a 20% tip. That's not bad, especially when you're waiting on a lot of tables. The highest benefit, highest price restaurants, benefits for men. So what does this indicate? It indicates that this kind of discrimination is a sorting kind of discrimination. It helps to ensure that women end up, if they're going to wait tables, more often at low-price restaurants, or maybe medium-price restaurants, but they have a disadvantage compared to men. If men are going to want to wait tables, they're going to end up working at the classiest joints, right? The most prestigious joints, the joints where you get the best pay. Where does the sex gap in pay come from? It's not the same people working at the same jobs doing exactly the same thing. Discrimination enters into the equation when people apply for different jobs and they don't get the same job. And gender is clearly a cue about where men belong and where women belong for this kind of work. Okay, so Alison Booth and Andrew Lee look at a different country now, Australia. And they look at 4 what are called feminized occupations, which just means that there are a lot of women in them. But there are 2 occupations that have a whole lot of women in them, wait staff and data entry. And there are some that have more women than men, but by a lower margin. Customer service, 68% women, and sales, 69% women. Now, of those 2 that are, there's a lot of women in them, but there's also a lot of men, 32% men in customer service, 31% men in sales, right? Those percentages are the same, but look at the hourly wage difference. It's a difference of $3.10 an hour in Australian dollars, by the way, right? So don't get too excited about working in customer service. These are Australian dollars. They are really different, even though they're feminized. And at the same time, we have these 2 jobs that are very clearly, very strongly dominated by women. Waiters and waitresses and data entry clerks. So when women and men who are equally qualified, audit study, field experiment, apply for jobs in wait staff, apply for jobs in data entry, these 2 highly feminized occupations, dominated by women in terms of number, women get called back more often. Men are discriminated against for those kinds of jobs. On the other hand, for customer service and for sales, where it's mostly women, but by a small margin, there are still a lot of men, there's no difference. There's no discrimination by gender. And most significantly, if we look back and we think about, sales, right, versus customer service is paid more. In this instance, being paid more and having a higher pay occupation doesn't lead to any gender discrimination. What does lead to gender discrimination is whether you have occupations that are really strongly, overwhelmingly women. And in that instance, discrimination works to ensure that applicants tend to be women who get the jobs, okay? And by a fairly large percentage margin. So this is sorting again. Discrimination works to sort us, and then we have different experiences. If we looked at masculinized occupations, would we expect to find the opposite? Well, in general, we do. So that men get sorted into masculinized occupations, women get sorted into feminized occupations. Their experiences at work are different. They get different pay, they get different benefits, they get different levels of respect. How much respect do you think you get waiting tables? Sometimes people are nice, but sometimes people are not. How much respect do you think you would get working in a managerial position? A little bit more respect. And people get sorted by gender. That is what discrimination is. It's a pattern in behavior. We don't necessarily know in these studies what the motivation was, because we can't look into their heads. We cannot take off the top of their skull cap and look inside and see what their thoughts are, but we can see what people do. And when we see what people do, we notice that gender discrimination happens. It's often depending on the context, it depends on the situation, and it leads to men and women being treated differently, being sorted differently, ending up in different places. That's what discrimination is, and it exists in this world.